Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome all back to the channel. Glad I could be producing another video so soon. I prefer to do more than less, but you know, things get away from you and stuff like that. So what helped to actually bring this video forward and so on and so forth is that I had a conversation with an atheist very recently. He commented on a video of mine where I spoke about whether Jesus or God basically sacrificed himself to himself. And in fairness, as far as atheists are concerned, they're not particularly interested in whether God actually did, for the most part, whether he actually did or did not. Because the main interest is that it's meant to be derogatory, sort of thing. So here's the video of mine that I did there, and was a comment on that video. So if you want to look at the comments, it is, there we go, there. So 33 replies. So a bit of a conversation with a gentleman, so we got into it. So if you guys want to go and have a look at that, you know, more than welcome to do so. And so I thought I'd make a video on this subject because, well, first of all, the conversation, I think it was a good one, actually. It wasn't vitriolic or anything like that, although I did find that he got frustrated with me, and that could be my fault. Maybe I just wasn't good enough to explain, or it could be his fault in that, you know, he didn't really understand what he was asking. And this is actually a position I maintained in the conversation, that I don't think he actually understood what it was he was asking, because initially his idea was that the whole concept of the Trinity was flawed, right? This is essentially what it boiled down to, is that so, you know, in a sense, just if you consider that the Trinity is three persons, it's one essence, three persons, three hypostases, then Christ dying is not God's sacrifice, is not the Father sacrificing himself to himself, or Jesus sacrificing himself to himself. Even if the sacrifice was happening in the pagan sense of the word, where you are sacrificing something to someone in order to gain some sort of special favor, even if it was happening in that sense, which is not, it's Jesus and Jesus and God the Father are two completely different individuals, persons, right, and entities. And so the argument still fails. So in his mind, what it eventually boiled down to was his assertion that the idea of the Trinity is illogical. But then right at the end, if you guys read through the conversation that we had together, he then started talking about how everything, all my substantiations and stuff like that, he was not interested in what can be logically, whatever the case might be, but he's more interested in about what can be proven or shown or demonstrated. And this is where I find that the couple of problems are occurring when you're having conversations, not just with people of other faiths, but people in general. Is a few things. People don't conflate categories of things. So when we're talking about whether or not the concept of the Trinity is logical, we are arguing over whether it is in fact logical or not. It is not an argument for the existence of God. That is a different argument. You know what I'm saying? So, because the thing is, a concept can be perfectly logical, even if that concept has no real world correlate. There's nothing, you know, even if I can, for example, I can logically, there's nothing logically contradictory about imagining a horse with wings that can fly, right? So for example, if we go into the whole idea of the multiverse basic, and atheists subscribe to this, right? You know, the multiverse, one of the things that the multiverse hypothesis states is that everything that can happen does happen You know what I'm saying? So then you're talking about not necessarily what can be proven, or whatever the case might be, or what in fact does exist, but you allow for everything that is logically possible, whether it does in fact exist or not. And that's a completely different thing. There's nothing logically incoherent about imagining or contemplating the concept of a horse with wings, and even in real life that could possibly happen, because in some existence somewhere, as long as this horse has got the wingspan that's correct to and the musculature to support the weight in flight of a horse, and had the corresponding metabolism and so on and so forth, why not? There's nothing internally incoherent or illogical about it. You know what I'm saying? So logically, it is possible, whether or not such a thing actually exists in one of the multiverses out there. And that's what the nature of this this argument is. So he started out by trying to argue against the logic by basically saying that the concept of the Trinity violates laws of logic. But the thing is, no matter how hard I tried, and this is a problem with atheists, because they think that their worldview, that their position is the default position, which is not. They think that they can just state things unargued, and as a Christian, you should never allow this to happen. If someone comes and says to you, "Listen, this violates the laws of logic," you need to say, "Okay, fair enough. Which laws of logic do you believe it violates? And why do you believe it violates them?" Because otherwise, any idiot could just come up to you and just assert, "Listen, this defies the laws of logic." Oh, okay, I'm glad you think so, but unless you give me more, we can't have a conversation about it, right? And then this is a problem a lot of the time that you get with atheists. And then what you will find is that when you get to the point where the atheist is unable to refute you, if your argument is sound and strong, he will then swap the goalposts and then start arguing about the existence of God and all, and he will take, and then if you are not savvy to what he's trying to do, and they're not necessarily doing this consciously either. It's not that they're trying to be intentionally underhanded. It's just not everyone's used to having these kinds of conversations, sort of thing. But what you do find sometimes is that they try then take you down a rabbit hole of things completely irrelevant to what the conversation was about in the first place. So when we argue for the fact that the Trinity as a concept is not logically impossible, there's nothing illogical about it, right? It's not the same as saying this is an argument or an evidence for God. It might be, but that's not what we're talking about at the moment. Now, obviously, it is a necessary condition, right? As far as Christians are concerned, it is a necessary condition that the concept of God be logically possible in order for God to actually exist. Because if God actually exists, then God exists in a way that is obviously logical. Contrary to, so for example, you find a lot again with atheists where they make that stupid storytelling. There's a lot of storytelling in atheism, but very little substance. So, can God make a rock so big that he can't lift it? Such a thing, that is what they're dealing with there, is something that is logically impossible, right? And so obviously God can't do it because it is not logically possible. And God, right, as Christians at least define it, God is omnipotent and can do anything that is logically possible. And what is or is not logically possible is defined by God himself. You understand what I'm saying? And so it's consistent. So to say that something that is completely irrational and illogical somehow refutes the existence of God, that he is not actually all-powerful, is then completely idiotic. Because when you say, could God create something so heavy he couldn't lift it, what you've created is a meaningless statement. It's a meaningless rhetorical device. There's no value in it at all. It's like saying someone is a married bachelor. It's a meaningless, nonsensical statement. It's impossible, right? And so this is what they try to do, because at the end of the day, atheists generally don't bother to actually understand what Christians are or are not saying, and when they're saying it. So obviously it is necessary for a Christian that if Trinitarianism was illogical, then we could not say that obviously that God is a Trinity. Of course, we couldn't say that. But the reason why we do say that God exists as a Trinity is because it is logical, and I'm going to argue for it now. I'm going to show you why it is in fact logical, and I'm going to argue for it to demonstrate that it is logically possible and consistent and all that kind of stuff. Because we need to remember how do we define God as far as the Christian is concerned. As far as the Christian is concerned, right? We have the universe, okay? We have the universe, billions of light years across. We have no idea, right? And in it, you've got the Milky Way, and you've got all the kinds of stuff, right? In the pagan religions, the deities exist within the bounds of the universe. They exist within temporal three-dimensional reality. This is the case for pagan deities. It is only in monotheistic religions where God exists outside of our three-dimensional space. How many dimensions, right? How many dimensions are pertain to the place or space that God inhabits? We don't know. We have no idea. It could be 4 dimensions. We definitely know it's more than ours, right? In whatever sense of the case might be. In the same way that we exist. So, for example, I'm drawing a picture here on a 2-dimensional surface. We do not. In order for us to be 3-dimensional beings and all that kind of stuff, we exist outside of the 2-dimensional surface, sort of thing. And then obviously, if there are higher beings and higher powers and kind of stuff that are not within this 3-dimensional space, then it's higher planes of existence. But whether it's the 4th dimension or the 5th or the 100th, we don't know. We have no idea. Why? We've got no access to it. Now, here's the interesting thing. Can we contemplate logically? Right? Can we logically contemplate? So when the formulation of God, the Trinity, is you've got one essence, right, and three hypostases, persons, right? We use the Greek word. So this is in Greek is ousia. In Greek, we use the Greek words because this is how it appears in the Bible, basically, right? Because the Bible, the New Testament, it's specifically, and even the Septuagint and all these kinds of things, a lot of Greek going on in there. So we use those words because that's the words they're using in the Bible, and then we transliterate it, right? And then we say that these 3, so one essence, 3 hypostases, and we say these 3 are one. All right, so the atheists and Unitarians and stuff like that will cry foul. Oh no, this can't happen. Impossible. Impossible. Right? Can't happen. Right? It's impossible. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Now, here's the thing. In Hellenism, that is Greek philosophy. Right. When you go to and you look at, I believe it's Aristotelian categories. In Greek philosophy, there says, in order to make a distinction, if you make a distinction at something, right, then what you are automatically doing is you are admitting division and composition within that thing by making distinctions within it. Right? Automatically. So to make a distinction implies composition, right, and division. Okay. Now, Christians reject this. Now, distinction can imply division, composition, and division. It can indeed do so, but it is not necessarily the case. Right. So how can we substantiate these things and talk about the Trinity? Let's take Euclidean geometry and let's extend it into the fourth dimension. Do people do this? Yeah, they do it all the time. It's called hypergeometry, essentially, and fourth dimensional, fifth dimensional, and stuff like that. So, for example, even if you look at quantum mechanics and all that kind of stuff, quantum physics, they took in string theory, I believe they posit 11 dimensions, right, to the to existence, 11 dimensions, and there's nothing logically incoherent about that, which is why you can go and you can work out all of the mathematics and all that sort of thing. There's nothing incoherent about it, right? It doesn't mean that 11 dimensions do in fact exist, but we're saying that it's not logically incoherent. We can describe it very logical, very formulaic, very mathematically sound ways. And so you can do the same thing. So when we have, let's talk about the dimensions here. If you have only one dimension, you can draw a line. Okay, we all know this. One dimension, you can draw a line. With two dimensions, you can then draw another line in the opposite dimension. So we can go from left to right, and we can go up and down, and we can then go and we can design a square. And the properties of the square, so we have, how many squares do we have here? We have one. How many objects do we have here? We have one object that is composed of four lines. So we have a harmony between the one and the many. We have four lines that make one object. There's no logical incoherence here whatsoever. We don't speak of, we believe this is one thing, right? One thing. We don't call it, we don't say this is four lines. We say it is a square. It is one singular entity, and we do not even say that this is comprised of four parts. You understand what I'm saying? Even though the line does in fact exist within there and a line has its own properties. The line doesn't cease to be a line now that it's part of a single whole, and we do not say that this is now that the square is its own object. We don't say it's composed of anything, right? This is one complete thing, and as soon as you take one away, you now no longer have a square. You've got something else, right? Now, let's go to a higher dimension, the third dimension. So these angles here are all 90 degrees, right? So now if we say, right, we're gonna project, because now we're working on a two-dimensional surface. We're going to project the third dimension onto the second dimension, right? And so what are we gonna do? What is it actually gonna look like? Right? What's it gonna look like? We all know what it's gonna look like because we've all drawn cubes before, have we not? Yeah? We've all drawn cubes before, and then we can there. Am I screwing this up? I'm screwing this up. Right. That is a very faulty cube. But you guys get the picture. We can project a cube onto a two-dimensional surface. Now, do we know what the properties of a cube are? The cube has 6 sides, all the sides of squares, and all of the angles are 90-degree angles. Yes? Yes. Now, here's the problem with projection. Trying to take a third-dimensional object and projecting it into the two-dimensional universe. If a two-dimensional individual, a little stick man, took his protractor, right? Took his protractor and says, right, I'm going to measure the angle of this cube. He would measure a 90-degree angle there, a 90-degree angle there, and there. But if he measured this angle here, he would not get 90 degrees. He'd get 135 degrees, assuming that this was at a 45 degree incline here, right? That angle there, he would measure it as, so this square here, you see, now this is not a square. In order for me to project it, I had to draw a rhombus, not a square. In the third dimension, that is a square. But in the second dimension, that is a rhombus. And that's an acute angle, that's an obtuse angle. You don't have 90-degree angles there. But in the third dimension, these angles are all of these angles are 90 degrees. Do you understand? So now the cube only has two squares if I project it. So we are losing an accuracy. We're losing a degree. So this does in fact represent a cube. There's nothing false about this picture at all. But we are losing something in the translation, right? In the analogy. This is an analogy of a cube, right? Because now, in order for me to draw it, I have only two squares. Everything else is a rhombus. I have two squares and four, and so there's a rhombus at the bottom, a rhombus at the top, a rhombus on both sides. So for me to project a cube onto a two-dimensional surface, I now no longer have 6 squares. I have 2 squares and 4 rhombus to project, and now the angle's not. But the reality is that it is something else, right? And also, this guy, if you lived in 2D land, he would tell you you are insane. He could not imagine a cube. It would be absolutely impossible for our stickman here to fathom or represent a cube in its true sense. Completely impossible. Completely impossible. Because what he has here is you've got essentially 2 different shapes. So you've got something, the essence of a rhombus is completely different to the essence of a square, in other words, right? You don't have a composition of, you understand what I'm saying? This trying to explain to him what a cube is, the whole explanation falls apart, essentially. So you can explain by analogy, but you never quite get there. Now, we have to then understand, right? Now we take a cube and go to the 4th dimension. What does a 4th dimension cube look like? So, now a 4th dimensional cube or square, actually a 4th dimensional, if we had to take the cube and project it in and take it to its highest state in the 4th dimension, you have a tesseract. That's what it's called. All right, you've got a tesseract. So what would you have? This is what it would look like, right? This is what it would look like. If you're trying to project it. So it's got like a, so now what do you have? What are the elements in this shape? What are the elements? You now have 2 squares plus another 2 squares, so you now have 4 squares, right? Then you've got 4. Now you've got 8 rhombus. So a rhombus is any shape. That's a rhombus. That's a square. But now what else do you have? You have this shape there. You now have a trapezoid. You now have another shape. Now, in a trapezoid, that angle, those angles are not 90 degrees. But in a tesseract, so for me to project a 4th dimensional object onto a 2-dimensional plane, or even into a 3-dimensional plane, I have to use a trapezoid to project it. In the 4th dimension, that angle there is actually 90 degrees. So is that one, and so is that one. Are 90 degrees. Right? We can't imagine, we can't represent, it is impossible to show you what it looks like. Impossible. We can get ideas and we can get, but otherwise it's completely mind-boggling. But we can formulate it mathematically. There's nothing incoherent or illogical about it. And you can get this with triangles. You can get it with let's have a look. See here, right? You can get it with all sorts of things. So let's have a look. See here. Right. So basically, So as for when you're using a square, right, the four-dimensional fourth dimensional square is called a tesseract. A triangle, a fourth dimensional triangle is called a pentatope, right, is known as a pentatope. And then a fourth dimensional polygon is known as a polychoron. And then your fourth dimensional circle, so you when a circle goes from a one dimensional or a two-dimensional plane, you have a circle. When a circle goes from 2D to 3D, it becomes a sphere, and when it goes from the 3D to the 4D, it becomes a globe. They call it a globe, right? So it's it's actually very interesting how these things all actually work out. And if you guys want, here is a website that you can have a look. Math World, Wolfram Math World, can have a look there, and they actually talk about these things. Very interesting. Whoops, sorry, I'm just messing stuff up here. Right, let's have a look there, what they're talking about. Right, and then you can represent it. There's all the mathematics there if you want to have a look at it and stuff like that. It's actually quite interesting stuff, especially if you can understand the mathematics. I'm not going to pretend to, right? But there is nothing logically incoherent with this sort of thing. And now if we want to, here's a tesseract, right? Here's basically a representation of a tesseract. Now, if you had to take the shape, right, and like a cube, and you had to rotate it around to look at the cube, you could see. So if you're looking at a cube in a certain direction, it would look like what I projected there early on, where you would have a rhombus. But as soon as you turn the cube to face you, you would see that the rhombus would now become a square. And actually artists understand this kind of concept very well, that artists have so you can see what some artists do is they have a piece of paper that is lying flat on a table, right? But by manipulating the shape of an object, right, they can actually draw something so that it looks like they can draw a cup on a flat piece of paper in such a way that it looks like the cup is actually standing up on top of the table. But then as soon as they rotate the page, you can see. So let's have a look, see here. So have a look at this here, right? This looks like a three-dimensional drawing, but basically this is actually flat on a table, right? This is a flat surface, but it looks like it looks 3D, right? So now let's have a look at what a tesseract would look like if we rotated it to see all the different sides. It's a bit mind-bending, isn't it? It doesn't even make sense to us, right? But that's basically if you had to take a tesseract, and I mean, it makes no sense to us whatsoever. Okay, so when we talk about God, who exists in a completely different outside of this 3D realm, you know, is it possible? Because again, if we talk about the tesseract is basically, so in the way that a cube is six squares and they all form one thing, right? You never talk about a cube as in a composite way. It's one thing, although it's got the 6 facets or the whatever facets and stuff like that. And again, this is an analogy. Right? I found that the gentleman that I was talking to, he just couldn't seem to get over the analogies, right? An analogy is always imperfect, because as soon as you get, if the analogy was perfect, then you wouldn't have an analogy. You'd be talking about the thing itself, right? And this is again a problem that people have. They get so hung up on an analogy that they never get to what the analogy is trying to point to. So in this sense, right, you have this goes to show, and again, we are not arguing for the actual existence of a tesseract. Whether it does or does not exist, we don't know, and we probably will never know unless we somehow invented a way to access the fourth dimension. But then even if we manage to access the fourth dimension, we probably wouldn't be able to perceive it because we're not designed to even perceive such a thing. We'd need a different kind of way of seeing, in a sense. And so this is when we're talking about God, right? And again, we can overdo it, but when we talk about God, we say very much, we talk about what the Bible reveals, because again, we're interested in what God has revealed of himself. We're not making these things, we're not making it up. It's what God has revealed, and we go no further. So when we talk about, and this is orthodox view of the Trinity, you have one essence, one divine essence. All three share a divine essence. But you have three persons, and these three are one. That is what we say. We say no more, and we say no less. Yes, we make essence-energy distinctions, but that's another story. But we say one essence, one divine essence, which they all share. And you have three persons, and these three are one. That's as far as we can go. Anything more than that, we have to say it's a mystery, because in the same way that fourth dimensional objects will always remain somewhat of a mystery to us. We can talk about them, we can conceptualize them, we can project them imperfectly, but that's as far as we go. They forever remain a mystery, forever outside of a perfect explanation, absolutely 100% one-to-one explanation, because we simply don't have access to that. And this is one thing that not only atheists need to realize, but also Christians. Because Christians many Christians, especially Western Christians, have got to the point where they are so, because of the Western mindset that wants explanation of absolutely everything, it's actually narcissistic in many ways. There's a Western narcissism that says, unless I can understand it or have it explained to me, I'm not going to believe it exists. And so the person's like, well, you have to convince me or I won't believe it. It's like, who the bloody hell are you? Right? Sort of thing. They feel entitled. Right? The Western individual feels entitled to explanations. And when it comes to God, you're not entitled to a damn thing. I have news for you, right? God has revealed everything that he can to us. We can understand it to the best of our abilities. We can understand it to the point where we say, it is not logically incoherent. It's not logically contradictory. It doesn't violate the laws of logic at all. But it does arrive at a point where we cannot go further, and we cannot go further because we exhaust our three-dimensional world, space, our three-dimensionally bound thinking and language that we have for these things. The rest we take on faith, because we don't, just in the same way, the multiverse. Physicists that take the multiverse as being something true, even, right? They're doing that on faith, and they're doing that based on the fact that, well, it's not incoherent, therefore I'm free to believe it, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You understand what I'm saying? Doesn't mean they do exist, but it means it is logically coherent. And therefore, if the Trinity concept is logically coherent, therefore you are allowed to believe it, especially if God has revealed to us that this is in fact how he exists, whether we can grasp it or not. You understand what I'm saying? We accept it on faith, and also because it's logically consistent and it's logically coherent. There's nothing that is necessarily incoherent about it. All right. And like I said, a lot of Christians, like I was going to say, should I say, but ADD is a glorious thing. A lot of Christians also give up on the faith because they're like, well, I can't explain it or I can't understand it. And therefore, if I can neither explain it nor understand it, then God ceases to exist. It's like, who the bloody hell are you, right? God doesn't cease to exist just because you can't understand something, right? And that is the problem. Now, it is not that Christianity. So the Bible does say, "Come, let us reason together" and stuff like that. It's not that we should be satisfied, because then this is another argument that atheists make. We shouldn't be satisfied with no explanation whatsoever. However, we should also be satisfied with the explanations that we can get, and be satisfied and accept the fact that there are limitations to that, and not try to basically deny God his existence just because there are limits to our ability to explain certain things, because that's just narcissistic. You are not entitled in any way, shape, or form to a perfect explanation of anything. Right? And the actual existence of the thing itself does not rely on your understanding of it. You know what I mean? And so then this is the problem where atheists get and stuff like that. They have faith in other areas. They will never admit it. Heaven forbid. Pun intended. Right? Heaven forbid. But they have faith in stuff that they can't possibly believe or justify, like moral values and duties. There's no reason, even according to their own worldview, there's no reason for them to believe such things exist, and yet they do. Even though they can't account for it in their worldview. Right? They try, they fail miserably, but they believe it. I mean, atheists love moralizing. I mean, one of the first things one thing that atheists love doing to Christians is calling us dishonest. It's like, what do you care? Survival of the fittest. If my lie is better than your lie, then who the hell are you to argue, right? On an atheist worldview. Why not? You know, if my lie is successful, if it makes me rich, if it helps me live my life and outbreed you, why not? You know what I'm saying? So there's this constant incoherence within their own worldview, and they allow for themselves things that they don't allow for Christians. They're not consistent in these kinds of things. They allow themselves to imagine all kinds of things as logically possible, logically coherent, whether it exists or not is irrelevant. But they're like, it's logically possible, and therefore we're logically okay to believe it. So. So much for that whole situation. And so yeah, that is what you get. The concept of the Trinity is logically coherent. It's logically possible. There's nothing wrong. There's no internal inconsistency with it. And even by analogy, God has created man in his image. A human being is an analogy of God. Right? It is an analogy because you get the same thing with human beings. Human beings share one essence. I have the same essence as you do, whoever you are watching this video right now. I've got the same essence that you do. We share the same exact human essence. Right? But me and you are two different persons. We are two different individuals, hypostasis of that essence. Now, the difference is that we are not united in many ways. In fact, the human being is not even united within themselves, right? So, for example, if you take Jungian psychology, just as an example, right? You have three parts. You have the ego, right? You have the id, and then you have the super ego. Right? And so the id is your carnal nature, shall we say? Your lower base drives, your sex drive, your sex, eating, all of your hedonistic, right? All of your hedonistic lower base creaturely desires, and then your super ego is all your morals, your morals, your rights and wrongs, your ethics, and your rights and wrongs, and all these kinds of things. And then the ego is this thing in the middle that judges between the two. When is it appropriate? When is it appropriate to have sex? When is it appropriate to eat? When is it mitigates these things, and then and then it tries to balance them out. Because when you look in the Bible's like, listen, you can be hyper legalistic. You need to be moral, but you can, and there's a balance between morality and legalism, right? So there was a poor man on the side of the road, nothing, starving, but I'm not going to feed the poor man on the Sabbath, like the Pharisees. I'm not going to feed the poor man on the Sabbath because otherwise that's breaking the Sabbath. Come on, feed the guy. Feed the guy. Jesus came to earth, taught them all kinds of morals and ethics, but he also healed them. He fed the 5,000. He balanced this out, right? And we know that even within ourselves, we have these competing, these parts of us that are always competing, that are always trying to negotiate for primacy, right? We even have an old phrase, or the spirit is willing, is the flesh is weak, but the spirit is willing, and all these kinds of things, these drives that pull us. We are not even unified in ourselves. You would never say that we're a composite. This is a way of speaking, right? This is a way of speaking. But we're not. When I say you have the super ego and the ego and the id, I'm not saying that you are literally composed of these separate parts, and that this implies composition and division. No, this is all. It's all you. But you definitely experience it as different things and stuff like that. And in the most extreme cases of human dysfunction, you can even get something called multiple personality disorder, where you literally have more than one person in the same body, different handwriting, different accents, different genders in the same body, different appreciation for different colors, different taste in music, all kinds of things, different ages in the same person. Now, we're not saying that God, this is analogy. This is analogy. Keep it in mind. But we have many examples of this thing where there's that in the whole world, there's always there's a balance between, and we often see people arguing for that, a balance between the one and the many. I mean, what do we talk about when we're talking about our political things, the right and the left? The left is completely consumed by communistic collectivistic thought, the many. We must worry about the many all the time. And then we have the people on the right that it's all about the individual, atomization, each thing, right? In medicine, right? There's an argument between studying the one organ as if it has nothing to do with the rest of the body, and then there's holistic medicine, which says I'm going to countenance the entire system as a whole in order to give my medical treatment, right? There's this constant, and this is the state of the fallen world. The state of the fallen world comes in where one of the reasons why we can't, and this is German philosophy, in fact, where we talk about Hegelianism and Hegelian dialectics and stuff like that, where everything is a dialectic between the light and the dark, rather than harmony and oneness and stuff like that, right? And we're not talking about oneness in the occult sense either. Right, because you essentially then fall into a modal collapse and all that sort of nonsense, right? There's fighting between man and woman, right? The man and woman were supposed to unite and become one flesh, but what do they do today? You've got feminists on one side, and you've got meninists on the other side, and men and women hate each other. There's no unity between the genders. They're constantly at odds with each other. And people are at odds within themselves. Things like gender dysphoria, body dysmorphic disorder, where you literally have, you have a dialectical tension against your very own self. We see this all over the place. But this is what sin brought in. Right? That's the effects of sin, all of this dialectical tension. It's evil. We talk about dividing and conquering and all these kinds of things. Right? So these concepts, they may seem a little bit abstract and stuff like that, but we do see this, we can understand it even from just mundane, general, daily living. When we see the kinds of problems and stuff like that in the world, when we should be united, we are divided. and when we should be an individual, we're not. And there should be a perfect balance between the things, right? And we get, again, going back to marriage, the two should become one flesh. Yet the two should not lose their own identity. The man's identity should not be subsumed under the identity of his wife, and vice versa. The woman needs to be her own person. She must not be subsumed under the identity and desires of her husband. He's not a tyrant. You understand what I'm saying? But we do it anyway because we're sinful, we're fallen, and everything we do has got a dialectical tension in it. You know, left and right, up and down, and that's, I want blue and you want green, and this, and so we fight and we don't get along, and things are destroyed, and there's no balance, there's no harmony, there's no symphony, right? And so yeah, ladies and gentlemen, the concept of the Trinity, not only is it not illogical, it is not incoherent. It's not even alien. It's not even alien. Especially if you understand what Christians are saying, that mankind is an analogy of God. And what are we constantly saying mankind should be like? We should unite, we should come together and be as one people. But instead we're divided, we're tribal, and we lament it all the time, don't we? We're all tribal, and we're fighting, and we're atomized in little echo chambers. We lament that. This concept is not even foreign. It's not even an alien concept. Okay. So there we go. Thank you for watching, and I hope this helped you somehow into thinking of these things. All right. Cheerio. God bless.